Look at a building like this, and your gut says exactly what mine does. That shouldn't be standing. A roof that leaps 100 feet with nothing under it. A tower leaning like it's mid-fall. A house hanging out over a waterfall. I'm an architect. And here's the secret of every building that looks impossible. It isn't beating physics. It's hiding a device, a counterweight, a cable, a column you'll never see, quietly doing all the work. 10 buildings that should fall down, and the invisible trick holding each one up. 7 structures that shouldn't stand, and the engineering that says otherwise. Counting down. Number 10, the tallest building on Earth. Over 800 meters. At that height, the real enemy isn't weight. It's wind, and the wind alone should be enough to tear a tower like this apart. 2 ideas keep it standing. The first is the buttressed core, 3 wings that all lean on one central spine, each wing bracing the other 2. It's a tripod logic, push any direction, and another wing is already there to resist it. Almost impossible to tip. The second idea is cleverer, and you can see it in the silhouette. As the tower climbs, it steps back, again and again, spiraling as it rises. So at every level, the wind hits a different shape. The gusts never get organized. They can't fall into a rhythm strong enough to shove the building, because the building keeps changing the rules on them. Wind tunnel tests showed it cut the wind forces by nearly 1/3. That's the trick. It doesn't outmuscle the wind. It refuses to give the wind a straight answer. Number 9. Most buildings fight earthquakes by being strong enough to shake along with the ground. This one does the opposite. It refuses to shake at all. The trick is at the very bottom. Instead of bolting the building to the earth, engineers set it on a row of thick bearings, layers of rubber wrapped around a core of lead. When the ground lurches sideways in a quake, those bearings flex and absorb the movement. The earth slides back and forth underneath, and the building above barely moves. It's called base isolation, and it's how you keep a hospital running or a museum's contents unbroken while the city around it is rolling. The strange part, to a layman, is that the safest building in an earthquake isn't the stiffest one. It's the one that's been deliberately disconnected from the ground, floating, just slightly, on a cushion engineered to take the hit so the structure doesn't have to. Number 8, and this one genuinely looks impossible. Solid metal struts, hanging in midair, not one of them touching another. They seem to float. The principle is called Tensegrity, tensional integrity. The sculptor who built the first one called it something better, floating compression. Here's how it works. The rigid pieces only ever push. The cables only ever pull. Arrange them just right, and the pushing struts get suspended inside a continuous net of pulling cables, so the whole thing holds its shape with nothing rigid actually connected. Push on it, and it springs back. It's how some of the lightest large structures ever made stand up, like Brisbane's Kurilpa Bridge, the largest of its kind. To the eye it reads as a magic trick, compression with no contact. But it's just forces in perfect balance. The purest proof on this list that standing up isn't about being solid. It's about being resolved. Number 7. A skyscraper that's falling over, deliberately. In Abu Dhabi, Capitol Gate leans a staggering 18 degrees, more than 4 times the Tower of Pisa. But Pisa was an accident, sinking into soft mud. This one leans by design, and that's far harder. The moment you tilt a building, gravity stops running safely down through it and starts trying to peel it over sideways. So the engineers pre-bent the spine the other way. They built the core leaning slightly backward, then stacked the floors to settle it into that dramatic forward lean, landing exactly where they wanted. It isn't falling. It's frozen mid-fall, held by a backbone you can't see. Number 6. A high-rise with no skeleton inside it. Walk into Norman Foster's HSBC headquarters in Hong Kong. Look up, and there are no internal columns carrying the floors, because the floors aren't sitting on anything. They're hanging. The whole building is suspended from 8 giant masts, The floors hung off them in stacks, like coats on a rack. Why bother? Because hanging the floors cleared the entire ground level into a vast open public plaza and let daylight pour down through the middle. It swapped the obvious solution, columns pushing up from below, for an invisible one, suspension pulling from above. Number 5. A building that loops through the sky. Beijing's CCTV headquarters isn't a tower, it's a continuous loop. Two leaning towers rise, bend, and reach for each other until they meet in a corner that juts out about 75 meters over open air. Every instinct says that overhang should snap off. So what holds it? Look at the skin. That strange web of diagonals isn't a pattern, it is the structure. The whole loop behaves as one continuous tube, and exactly where the forces pile up, the bracing thickens. There's no top holding up a cantilever, because the entire building is the cantilever carrying itself around one closed ring. Number 4, and here it gets humbling. For everything modern engineering can do, a wooden tower solved the hardest problem of all 1400 years ago. Japan's 5-story pagodas sit in one of the most earthquake-prone places on Earth, and they almost never fall. Famously, only a tiny handful have ever collapsed, while modern buildings beside them came down. The secret runs right up the middle, one massive central pillar, the shrugs. And here's the strange part. It often isn't even fixed to the floors. It hangs or rests loose. When the ground heaves, each story sways slightly out of step with the next, and that free central column knocks against them and damps the motion. A pendulum. In wood, centuries before we had a word for it. Number 3. That exact idea, blown up a quarter-mile into the air. Taipei 101 stands in a city that gets typhoons and earthquakes, and a tower that tall wants to sway hard enough to make you seasick. So near the top, they hung the fix in plain sight. A golden steel sphere, 660 tons of it, suspended on cables as a giant pendulum. When the wind shoves the tower one way, the ball lags and swings the other, dragging against pistons that bleed the motion away as heat. It cuts the sway by around 40%, and unlike most structural tricks, they turned it into a feature. You can ride up and stand right next to it. It's the shrugs reborn in steel. The same 1400-year-old instinct, now a tourist attraction. Number 2. The most famous house in the world, which was quietly falling down. Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater throws its terraces straight out over a waterfall on bold concrete cantilevers. A masterpiece, and, structurally, a mistake. Wright wanted the thinnest, most daring cantilevers he could get, and he didn't put enough steel in them. From the day the forms came off, the terraces began to droop. By the end of the century, the main cantilever had sagged around 7 inches and was still creeping toward failure. The rescue, in 2002, was invisible. Engineers threaded high-strength steel cables through the existing beams and tightened them, post-tensioning the concrete to arrest the sag. The icon stands today on hidden steel its own architect never wanted in it. And number 1. The building that should have killed hundreds and was saved in secret. When New York City Corp Center opened in 1977, it had a showpiece trick. It stands on 4 massive columns set at the middle of each side, not the corners, so the whole tower seems to float above the church tucked beneath it. A year later, its engineer, William Lemessurier, was prompted by a student's question to recheck his own numbers. What he found stopped him cold. Those mid-side columns left the tower unusually weak against winds striking it on the diagonal, and to cut cost, the critical joints had been bolted together, not welded. Put it together, and he calculated a storm strong enough to topple it would hit New York, on average, once every 16 years. And hurricane season had already started, so they did the only thing they could. In total secrecy, welders covered around 200 joints with steel plates, working through the night, after the offices emptied, while the city slept below. The public didn't learn the truth for 17 years. The most dangerous tower in New York was quietly fixed in the dark, and almost no one ever knew. 10 buildings that look like they break the rules. Not one of them does. Every single one is held up by something you can't see from the street. A pre-bent spine, a hanging mast, a closed loop, a loose pillar, a swinging ball, a hidden cable, a midnight weld. That's the real lesson. In architecture, the drama is almost never the part that's showing. The boldest thing a building can do is look impossible and quietly be perfectly, invisibly safe. So next time something shouldn't be standing, don't ask if it's holding up. Ask what's holding it up. There's always a device. And if you want the opposite, structures that failed and rewrote the rules for everyone after, that's the next one.